It's funny how you can be the CEO of a company worth 9 figures and still feel like a child asking for approval at the dinner table. I realize now that the two things, the boardroom and the dining room, exist in completely separate universes. In one, my voice moves markets. In the other, it has never been loud enough to be heard over the clatter of silverware. The story of how I finally left that table for good doesn't begin with a boardroom battle or a dramatic walkout. It begins, as it always did, with my birthday. I was 29. The call came through on the large monitor in my office, a grid of smiling, familiar faces against the backdrop of my mother's beige living room. My office, all glass and brushed steel, overlooks the entire San Francisco Bay. The Golden Gate Bridge was shrouded in its usual morning fog, a silent, majestic giant. On my screen, my family was huddled together on their sofa, a picture of cozy suburban life. "Happy birthday, sweetie," my mother chirped, her voice a little too loud, a little too bright. My father, Richard, leaned into the frame, his face a mask of gruff affection. 29, huh? Still tinkering with that computer hobby of yours?" I felt a familiar tightening in my chest, a dull ache I'd learned to live with. It was the same tone he'd used when I was 22, showing him my first business plan. He'd laughed then, a deep, booming sound that filled his wood-paneled study. "Aurotech? Sounds like an air freshener, Ari. Stick to your studies." I had left college a month later. It was a decision they saw not as brave, but as reckless. The first major entry in a long ledger of my failures. "It's going well, Dad," I said, keeping my voice even. My company had just closed a second round of funding that was reported in the Wall Street Journal. Not that they would have read it. Their news came from the local paper and Facebook updates from their friends' children. Then my sister, Olivia, squeezed into the frame, her arm slung around her best friend, who was also, confusingly, named Olivia. I called them the Olivias. My sister was the golden child, the one who did everything right, got the sensible degree, the stable marketing job, the long-term boyfriend. Her friend Olivia was her shadow, her hype woman, and a loyal soldier for the family's narrative. Today, they were beaming. "Ari, happy birthday," my sister sang. "We have some news. It's kind of a birthday present for everyone, really." The other Olivia leaned in, her smile a little too wide. "Tell her. She'll be so thrilled for you." My sister took a deep breath. "I got the promotion. Senior marketing manager." The screen erupted in a chorus of congratulations. My father's chest puffed out with pride. "That's my girl. Real-world success. That's what matters." The words hung in the air, aimed not at my sister, but at me. My mother twisted a pearl earring, her brow furrowed with that familiar, loving concern that felt more like pity. "Oh, Ariana, that's wonderful for your sister, isn't it? We just hope you find that kind of stability soon." Her friend Olivia delivered the final cut, her voice coated in a sweet, condescending poison. "We do, Ari. You're too smart to be throwing your life away on a dream." My jaw ached from clenching it so hard. I forced a smile. "That's great, Liv. Congratulations." I didn't have the energy to explain that my dream employed 150 people and was currently developing encryption software that would soon be used by half the banks in the country. To them, if it didn't come with a 401k and a dental plan they understood, it wasn't real. It was a phase, a failure in progress. For years, I had internalized their perspective. I'd spent countless nights staring at my ceiling, wondering if they were right. I'd see their friends' kids posting pictures of their weddings, their new homes, their sonograms, and I would feel a pang of something. Not envy, I see now, but the hollow feeling of being fundamentally misunderstood. My mother kept a scrapbook of these achievements. She'd show it to me when I'd visit, pointing to photos of people I barely knew. "See? Look how happy they are. A good job, a nice family." Her unspoken question was always the same. Why can't you just be normal? The real breaking point, the inciting incident, came a week after my birthday. My father called me, and his tone was serious, businesslike. I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe he'd seen the article. Maybe he wanted to finally understand. "Ariana," he started, "your mother and I have been talking. We've decided to make some moves with the family trust." My breath caught. The trust was my grandmother's legacy, a modest but meaningful sum she had left to help her grandchildren get a start in life. "We've decided to release a significant portion to Olivia," he continued, his voice steady and reasonable. "She's on a manager's salary now, and this will help her with a down payment on a house in a good neighborhood. It's a sound investment in her future. A stable career deserves a stable foundation." I stayed quiet. And in that quiet, I heard everything I needed to. "Now, for you," he said, and I could hear him shifting in his chair, adopting the tone of a man delivering difficult but necessary news. "We've decided not to invest in your venture. It's just too risky. We can't in good conscience put your grandmother's money into something so uncertain." "I didn't ask you to," I said, my voice barely a whisper. He didn't hear me. He was on a roll. "What we want to do is keep your portion safe, as a safety net for you. For when this tech thing doesn't work out, it's important to have something to fall back on." In the background, I could hear a faint murmur of agreement. I recognized the voice. It was Olivia, the best friend, who was apparently over for dinner. She was reinforcing his decision, validating their complete and utter lack of faith in me. It wasn't a punishment. It was worse. It was a financial vote of no confidence. It was a statement of absolute, loving, soul-crushing non-belief. They weren't cutting me off. They were building a cage of security around a failure they had already predicted. After I hung up the phone, I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I swiveled my chair around to face the window. The fog had burned off, and the bay was a brilliant, shimmering blue. Ferries cut white lines across the water. The city hummed with energy, with innovation, with the very ambition they were trying to protect me from. This was my world. This was the reality they refused to see. For the first time, the ache in my chest was gone. In its place was a chilling stillness. I finally accepted the truth. They would never see me. They would never understand my world, my work, or my worth. Their love was a conditional contract, and the primary condition was that I remain small. Their vision for my life was a beautifully furnished prison, and I had been rattling the bars for years, begging them to see the sky outside. The emotional dam didn't break with a flood of tears. It cracked, and all the hurt, all the disappointment, all the quiet rage drained away, leaving behind a foundation of cold, hard clarity. I picked up my phone. I opened the family group chat, a constant stream of cheerful inanity and photos I was never in. I didn't leave the group. I muted it. Forever. I went into my contacts and deleted my father, my mother, and my sister from my favorites. It wasn't an act of anger. It was an act of triage. I was cutting off the limb to save the body. I was downgrading their access to my life, not because I hated them, but because I had to survive their love. I looked out at the glittering lights of the Bay Area, a world that didn't ask me to be smaller, a world that paid me to be bigger. A silent vow formed in my mind. It wasn't for revenge. It wasn't even for them. It was for me. It was a promise to stop seeking validation from a well that had long run dry. My final thought was short, sharp, and utterly liberating. Let them think I'm failing. The silence that followed my decision was deafening at first, then clarifying. It was like living with a constant low-grade static your whole life, and then, suddenly, it's gone. You can finally hear yourself think. And what I thought was, work. My pain didn't curdle into resentment. I didn't have the time. I recycled it. I took all the energy I had spent trying to excavate approval from the granite of their expectations and poured it into the foundations of my company. My purpose, I realized, wasn't to fight them. It was to build. This was the phase where I gathered my receipts. but they weren't screenshots of their texts or angry journal entries. My receipts were milestones, tangible proofs of the reality I was creating, bricks in the wall I was building between my past and my future. The first receipt was a term sheet from a top-tier venture capital firm. I remember sitting in their conference room, a lone woman surrounded by 15 men in identical blue shirts. They grilled me for hours. They questioned my projections, my tech, my leadership. But unlike my father, they weren't questioning my right to be there. They were testing the steel of my ambition. When their lead partner finally slid the document across the table, my hands were steady as I picked it up. The number in the offer made my breath catch, but it wasn't the money that felt like a victory. It was the validation. It was the signature line that read, Ariana Torres, founder CEO. I signed it, and the ink felt more permanent than blood. The second receipt was a photograph. It was taken at 3 a.m. after we successfully launched Aura Secure, our flagship software. In it, I'm standing on a desk holding a bottle of cheap champagne, surrounded by my first 30 employees. We were exhausted, running on pizza and adrenaline, but we were euphoric. Looking at their faces, young, brilliant, tired, and all looking at me with trust, I felt a sense of responsibility that was terrifying and exhilarating. These people had tied their futures to my hobby. Their belief was a weight I was honored to carry. It was a stark contrast to the weight of my family's doubt, which had always just tried to drag me down. While I was building my reality, they were busy reinforcing their fiction. My well-meaning aunt, my mother's sister, would occasionally forward me a family email chain, I think in an effort to keep me included. Most of it was banal chatter, but one message contained a photo from a recent family barbecue I hadn't been invited to. There was my sister, Olivia, standing next to her best friend, Olivia, both holding up glasses of rosé. The caption, written by the friend, read, "A perfect day celebrating my bestie's real success. So important to have your feet on the ground. Family first. Stable careers." The old Ariana would have felt a sting of exclusion, a flare of anger. The new Ariana just felt a distant pity. They were celebrating a promotion in a world the size of a postage stamp, while I was trying to build an empire. The irony wasn't lost on me. They were hashtagging about stable careers while I was creating them. I deleted the email. This was when the shift inside me became permanent. My internal monologue, the one that had been a chorus of self-doubt for years, began to change its tune. The question was no longer, why don't they believe in me? It became, how did I ever let their definition of success dictate my own happiness? I wasn't just angry at them anymore. I was mourning. I mourned the version of myself who had swallowed their sweet poison for so long, the girl who thought their approval was a prerequisite for her own self-worth. I mourned the years I'd wasted trying to translate my dreams into a language they could understand, when I should have just been building my world in my own native tongue. My next receipt was architectural. It was a set of blueprints for our new office, a 50,000 square foot space in a new tower downtown. I unrolled them across the floor of my cramped apartment, the one my mother always worried was too small and lonely. I traced the lines with my fingers, the open-plan workspace, the labs, the wellness center, the cafeteria that would serve free lunch to all 150 of my employees. This was more than an office, it was a testament. It was a physical space dedicated to the very ambition my father had called a risky venture. He had offered me a safety net. I had built a skyscraper instead. The last few years had been a quiet, methodical climb. While my family was trading gossip, I was trading on the NASDAQ. While they were mapping out my sister's wedding, I was mapping out our global expansion. I didn't do it to spite them. I barely thought of them at all. They existed in a past I had no interest in revisiting. My focus was on the horizon, on the next problem to solve, the next breakthrough to achieve. The climax of this period, my final and most undeniable receipt, arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in a simple manila envelope. My assistant left it on my desk, her eyes wide. "This just came by courier," she'd said. Inside was an advance copy of the upcoming issue of Forbes. I pulled it out. And there I was. It wasn't a small mention in the business section. It was the cover, a full-page professionally shot portrait of me, sitting in my half-finished new office with the city skyline behind me. I looked serene, confident, and perhaps for the first time in my life, completely and utterly myself. The headline was printed in bold, white letters across my chest. Ariana Torres, the architect of tomorrow. I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window of my office. I held the magazine up, my own image reflected in the glass against the backdrop of the real city. This was my smoking gun. It was the one piece of evidence that was utterly undeniable. It wasn't a weapon to be used against my family. It was a mirror. It showed me who I had become, not in spite of them, but in their absence. I looked at the face on the cover, this woman they would not recognize, and I felt a profound sense of peace wash over me. My pulse wasn't racing, it was slow and steady. The plan was clear, and the plan was simple: to live. To continue living this life I had built, fully and unapologetically. The need for their approval had finally, blessedly, withered and died. It had been replaced by something far more powerful: my own. My final thought, as I placed the magazine gently on my desk, signaled my total liberation. It was never about proving them wrong. It was about proving myself right. For 2 years, the silence held. It was a clean, productive silence filled with product launches, hiring surges, and the steady thrumming rhythm of a company hitting its stride. I hadn't spoken to my immediate family since the day my father pledged my inheritance to my failure. Then, a week before his 60th birthday, the call I knew would eventually come, came. It wasn't from him, or my mother. It was from my Aunt Carol, the family's designated peacekeeper. "Ariana, darling," she began, her voice thick with a practiced gentleness. "Your father is turning 60. It would mean the world to him if you were there. Just for one dinner. No drama, I promise." I almost said no. The thought of re-entering that atmosphere, of breathing that air thick with their judgment, felt like a step backward. But then a strange sense of calm curiosity settled over me. I had spent years caring what they thought. What would it feel like to be in that room and feel nothing at all? To observe them not as a daughter seeking approval, but as an anthropologist studying a lost tribe. "Okay, Carol," I said. "I'll be there." The house was exactly as I remembered it, a perfect museum of my childhood. The same family photos on the mantelpiece, the same beige walls, the same faint scent of potpourri and disappointment. I walked in, and the conversation, which had been bright and loud, dipped into a momentary lull. I was a quiet disruption, a ghost at the feast. I had dressed carefully, not for a fight, but for a board meeting. An elegant but understated black dress, quiet jewelry, the kind of simple, expensive sheath that telegraphs power without having to say a word. My family, of course, misinterpreted it completely. My mother rushed forward, her hands fluttering nervously. "Oh, Ariana, you look so sophisticated. You've finally settled down a bit." It was a compliment, but the subtext was clear. You've finally given up on that childish tech nonsense. My sister Olivia gave me a hug that felt more like a pat-down, her eyes scanning me with a mixture of pity and suspicion. Her best friend Olivia stood behind her, a sympathetic, knowing smile plastered on her face. It was the look one gives a lost cause who has finally wandered home. "It's good to see you, Ari," she said, her tone implying that my return was an admission of defeat. We sat for dinner. The table was set with the good china, reserved for occasions when the performance of a happy, successful family was paramount. And the performance began. They continued their belittling narrative as if the last 2 years had never happened. My father asked if I was still living with roommates in that dreadful part of the city. My mother asked if I'd met a nice young man yet. They seemed almost relieved to see that in their eyes nothing had changed. I was still their project, their charity case. My sister talked loudly about her recent vacation to Hawaii, a reward for exceeding her sales targets. Then her friend Olivia, with an air of profound generosity, turned to me. "Ari, I was just thinking." she said, her voice saccharine sweet. A friend of mine is a head of HR at a very stable insurance company. I could pass your resume to her. It's never too late to find a real job, you know. I didn't react. I simply smiled, took a sip of my wine, and felt the heavy weight of the linen napkin in my lap. Looking back, the scene was almost theatrical. Each of them was playing their part to perfection, reinforcing a reality that had ceased to exist 2 years ago. I let them talk, letting them dig their own graves with every misguided, condescending word. I felt strangely serene, detached. The power in the room, I realized, wasn't in arguing. It was in knowing the truth and letting them swim in their own fiction. The reveal, when it came, was not orchestrated by me. It was accidental, a stray bullet from an outsider who didn't know the rules of their game. A man arrived late, just as dessert was being served. He was older, sharply dressed, with an air of easy authority. My father stood up immediately, his face beaming. "Mr. Chen, so glad you could make it." He was my father's most important business partner, a man my dad had been trying to impress for years. Mr. Chen smiled, shaking my father's hand, his eyes scanning the table with polite interest. And then they stopped. They stopped on me. His polite smile faltered, replaced by a look of stunned recognition. He took a step away from my father and walked directly toward my end of the table, his gaze locked on me. The cheerful dinner chatter sputtered out. "Excuse me," he said, his voice cutting cleanly through the sudden quiet. "Ariana Torres, I had no idea you were Richard's daughter." My father's proud smile froze on his face. He looked back and forth between us, utterly bewildered. You two know each other?" Mr. Chen let out a short, incredulous laugh, his eyes still fixed on me. "Know her? Richard, my son's venture fund in Silicon Valley has been trying to get a meeting with you for 6 months. They say it's harder than getting an audience with the Pope." He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping into a tone of pure awe and respect. He was speaking to me, but his words were for the entire table. "You're the owner of Oratech, aren't you?" he asked, though it wasn't really a question. "The biggest tech firm in the Bay?" A dead, shocked silence fell over the table. It was so complete I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. My sister's fork slipped from her fingers and clattered onto her plate, the sound like a gunshot. I looked at Olivia, the friend, whose jaw was literally agape, her mask of pity shattered into a million pieces of disbelief. My sister's face was a pale, tight mask of envy and shock, and my father, his proud, blustering facade crumbled. The color drained from his face, leaving behind the slack-jawed confusion of a man whose entire worldview had just been detonated before his eyes. They were all staring at me, waiting for an explanation, a denial, an attack. I didn't give them one. I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't say, "I told you so." I simply turned my calm, steady gaze to Mr. Chen and offered him a warm, confident smile. "It's a pleasure to meet you," I said, my voice even and clear. "And yes, that's me." I said nothing more. I didn't need to. I took another sip of my wine and left them all to drown in the deafening, devastating silence of a truth they could no longer deny. I didn't stay for dessert. After my quiet confirmation to Mr. Chen, I politely excused myself, murmuring something about an early morning. I didn't look at my family as I left. I didn't need to. The image of their frozen, shattered faces was seared into my memory. I walked out of that house, the one I grew up in, and for the first time I didn't feel like I was leaving anything behind. The drive back to San Francisco was quiet. I didn't turn on the radio. The silence in my car was a sanctuary compared to the one I had left at the dinner table. The story of what happened after I left came to me in fragments over the next few days, mostly from my Aunt Carol in a series of hushed, frantic phone calls. Apparently, my departure had been the detonator. Mr. Chen, a man who respected success above all else, had spent the rest of the evening asking my father questions he couldn't answer about Oratech's market cap and Series C funding round. My father's embarrassment had quickly curdled into a silent, simmering rage. My mother had burst into tears, confused about all the secrecy, and my sister, Olivia, had locked herself in her old bedroom, refusing to speak to anyone. The family image, that carefully curated portrait of success and stability, had been shattered. The loyal friend, Olivia, I heard, had left quickly, humiliated by her own catastrophic misjudgment. Then came the flood. It was a deluge of half-hearted, self-serving attempts at reconciliation. They weren't apologies. I realize now they were applications. Applications to rejoin the life of someone they had suddenly deemed successful. The first was a text from my mother. "Ariana, darling, I had no idea. We had no idea. Why did you never tell us? We would have been so proud." I stared at the message, feeling not anger, but a profound, weary sadness. She still didn't get it. My success wasn't a secret I had kept from them. It was a reality I had built without them. Her pride was conditional, a prize to be awarded only after the outcome was certain. What I had needed wasn't pride. It was faith. Next came a voicemail from my father. His voice was gruff, stripped of its usual booming confidence. "Ariana, it's your father. Well, Mr. Chen was very impressed. Very impressed. We should talk. About synergy. Maybe some investment opportunities. Call me." He didn't say, "I was wrong." He didn't say, "I'm sorry for underestimating you." He said, "Let's talk about synergy." He saw my company not as a testament to my vision, but as a new asset he could potentially leverage. He was still the same man, just with a new angle. The most revealing message came from Olivia, the friend. It was a long, fawning email, a masterpiece of revisionist history. "Ari!" it began, the multiple exclamation points like tiny flags of desperation. "I am still in shock. So that's what you were working on all this time. I always knew you were a genius, I just didn't understand the scale. I feel so silly. My offer to help with your resume must have sounded so stupid. LOL, we absolutely must reconnect and catch up properly. I'm dying to hear everything." I read the email twice, a cold, detached clarity settling over me. She wasn't apologizing for her condescension or her years of reinforcing my family's narrative. She was simply trying to reposition herself on the winning team. These weren't olive branches. They were grappling hooks, desperate attempts to latch onto a rocket ship they had sworn would never leave the ground. Amid this flood of insincerity, one message resonated. It was a text from a quiet cousin of mine, a software engineer who had also been at the dinner. He'd always been on the periphery of the family drama. His text was simple, direct, and utterly genuine. It said, "I always thought they were wrong about you. Congratulations, Ariana. You deserve all of it." That was it. No exclamation points, no fawning praise, no agenda. Just a small, quiet gesture of recognition from someone who actually understood the world I lived in. That single text meant more to me than all of my family's desperate backtracking combined. It was a reminder that true support is often a quiet nod, not a loud parade. The external validation, the final nail in the coffin of their old narrative, came a month later. I had been invited to give the morning keynote speech at Visionaries, the biggest tech conference of the year. Standing backstage, looking out at the sea of 10,000 faces, I felt a tremor of nerves, but it wasn't the old fear of not being good enough. It was the electric hum of being exactly where I was supposed to be. I walked on stage to a wave of applause. The topic of my speech was building your own table. I didn't mention my family. I didn't have to. I spoke about the early days of entrepreneurship, the loneliness, the self-doubt, and the critical importance of building a support system when you have none. I talked about finding validation not from the outside world, but from the work itself. I told them that the most important investment you can ever make is a belief in your own vision, especially when no one else shares it. As I finished, the room was silent for a beat, and then the applause began. It wasn't just applause, it was a standing ovation. 10,000 people on their feet. The live stream of the event, I later learned, went viral. News articles about the speech were everywhere, framing it as a new manifesto for a generation of entrepreneurs. Standing on that stage, bathed in the warm stage lights, with the roar of the crowd washing over me, I felt the last vestiges of my old life fall away. My family's drama, their misguided love, and their profound misunderstanding felt like a distant echo from another lifetime. It couldn't touch me here. This world, this success, this moment, it was mine. And in that moment, I felt the first true, unshakable sense of peace I had ever known. The war was over, not because I had won, but because I had simply stopped fighting. I had built a world so large there was no longer any room for their smallness. The world after the storm is quiet. The echoes of the keynote speech and the subsequent articles faded, leaving behind not a void, but a clean, open space. My life, once so crowded with the noise of my family's expectations, was finally my own. The victory wasn't in the public recognition or the stock price. It was in the silence. It was the freedom to hear my own thoughts, to define my own days. I found that my focus began to shift. The relentless drive to build the company, to prove my concept, softened into a desire to cultivate. I started spending less time in the main boardroom and more time in the greenhouse, a collaborative workspace we had built at Oratech for new projects. I began personally mentoring a group of aspiring female entrepreneurs, young women with brilliant ideas and very little backing. I'd sit with them for hours, a coffee mug warm in my hands, listening to their pitches with the seriousness and respect I was never given. I saw my younger self in their eyes, that fierce blend of hope and fear. In their success, I found a satisfaction deeper than any market valuation. This was the counter-narrative to my family's story. Their legacy was one of conditional support and limited belief. Mine would be one of empowerment. This new purpose took on a formal shape. 3 months after the keynote, my legal team finalized the paperwork for the Aura Foundation. I signed the documents in my office, the same office where I had once looked out at the bay and made a silent vow to myself. The foundation's mission was simple and direct: to provide seed money and mentorship to young innovators from underrepresented backgrounds, with a special focus on those without traditional family support systems. I had turned the wound of my past into a well for others to draw from. My father had offered me a safety net to catch me when I failed. I had created a trampoline to launch others. That fall, I hosted a dinner at my home. It wasn't a party or a celebration of a new deal. It was quiet, informal. My new table. The guests were few, but their presence filled the space with a warmth and authenticity my parents' house never had. There was Ben, my lead engineer, who had been with me since the garage days. There was Eleanor, my first mentor, a retired professor who had believed in my business plan when it was just scribbles on a napkin. My quiet cousin, the software engineer, was there, and we talked for hours about neural networks. And at the head of the table, animatedly describing her new app, was a young woman named Maya, the first recipient of a grant from the Aura Foundation. We drank good wine and ate simple food, and the conversation flowed from technology to art to ridiculous stories from our pasts. There was no performance, no subtext, no one trying to prove anything. It was a gathering of peers, a family of choice, bound not by blood but by mutual respect and shared passion. Looking around at their faces, lit by the warm glow of the candles, I felt a sense of belonging so profound it was almost overwhelming. This was the world I had built. Later that evening, after everyone had left, I was clearing away the wine glasses when my phone buzzed on the counter. I picked it up. It was a text from my sister, the first direct contact in almost a year. The message read, "Can we please just talk? Dad is so proud." I read the words, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not triumph, not even sadness. Just a distant, quiet pity for people who could only learn to speak the language of pride after it had been translated for them by Forbes and Mr. Chen. Forgiveness, I realized, isn't something you give to another person like a gift. It's the peace you claim for yourself when you realize they no longer have any power over you. Their pride was irrelevant now. I didn't need it. I had my own. I looked at the picture on my mantelpiece, a photo I had taken that night of my new table, of Ben and Eleanor and my cousin and Maya, all of them laughing. I set my phone down on the counter, leaving the message unread. The story closes here, with me standing alone on my balcony, the cool night air on my face. The San Francisco skyline is a glittering tapestry of light spread out before me, a city of dreamers and builders. Each light is a story, a struggle, a victory. I am one of them. I am not the woman who was underestimated by her family. I am not the girl who was told her dreams were a hobby. I am the architect of this life. I am the founder of my own peace. I take a quiet, contented breath, fully at home in the world I created. My final thought is a powerful, universal truth, one I had to build an empire to understand. This seat was never given. I built it.